Hi there, my name is Mary Lou Bukavalis. I have the great privilege of being the library director here at the Graves Library. And we are here for another episode of What's Your Story? So today we have a very special guest. Joan Dawson is here with me today. Welcome, Joan.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you for sitting in the hot seat.
You've always got hot seats, Mary.
So we like to start off by letting people know or asking the question where you grew up. Where were you born and those kinds of things?
Spent my early life in Massachusetts in one house, and that was for 21 years. With growing up with 4 sisters, I was the middle child, no boys. So it was quite a little lady's house, sort of like Little Women, except we weren't very well behaved. But that was Maynard, Massachusetts. My dad owned a drugstore. We all worked there, and I worked there even the night before I got married at 21.
Oh my goodness!
Because that was my only job. And then stayed in Massachusetts for quite a while, and always came back to Massachusetts until I moved to Maine.
Until you moved to Maine. So, and you have 4 beautiful children and many grandchildren. How many?
12.
12. So, and they're kind of all over the country, right?
They most of a couple of the families live in Newburyport. A couple live in a daughter lives in Boston. And then a daughter-in-law who lives in California, and a son who lives in Denver.
Wow.
So we don't see those 2 as often, but the others I see a lot.
So for the pandemic, were you able to get together through technology? Did you keep in touch? How did that work for you for having people kind of spread out?
Well, thank God for Zoom. I never, ever knew it, because most people didn't.
Yeah.
But did a lot of things on Zoom this year, and one was family stuff. FaceTime. I've had FaceTime. I called them wines, WHINE wines, with friends, and 5 o'clock meet on FaceTime, and so that kept me anyway socially active without being able to get out and actually talk to people as much as you'd like to.
Well, and you're a very social person, so for when we were in lockdown and whatnot, that must have been really hard because we see you out in the community volunteering for many, many things over the years, and to have that happen, it must have been hard.
It was hard, but actually I was able to still do some volunteering in a limited fashion, and so at least I felt like I was doing something with my energy and time. And the kids are all wonderful, and they would come up, and we had Thanksgiving in the garage with the door open, and I had one of the families up for Christmas in the garage with the door open. Decorated. It was fun.
Wow.
It was fun, but they wanted to come up, and they didn't want to come in the house because they were coming from Massachusetts.
Yeah, and they were all worried about you.
Yeah.
And you're one of those cool grams that texts with your grandchildren?
Constantly.
We like that. That's really cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
So I'm going to go back a little bit and talk about schooling. So you, Maynard, Mass, and then where did you go to college?
Well, I went to high school. I didn't go to Maynard High School.
Oh, okay.
I went to Rose Hawthorne in Concord, Mass, which was a girls' Catholic school. So to expand from Maynard, we went to Rose Hawthorne, and I had 23 girls in my graduating class.
Oh, wow.
So it wasn't too exciting and expansive, but that was my high school. And then Boston College.
Mm-hmm. And what did you study at Boston College?
Elementary education was my thing. I wanted to be a special ed teacher, which is what special education was the was the degree then, but you couldn't be a special ed teacher unless you had decided you were going to stay single
Oh,
for 3 to 5 years after you graduated, because that you couldn't do that and move around or be pregnant or have
yeah.
any issues. So because I was dating my husband Leo through college, that I switched to elementary ed. But my passion has always been for special kids.
Well, and that really takes somebody with a lot of compassion, empathy. Any interesting stories that you could tell us? Something that happened that you remember, when you were teaching. I mean, I know that personally that you have hundreds of stories to share.
I have hundreds of stories. I talk a lot when we're together, and you do too, so that's good.
Well, maybe I'll ask it this way. If somebody were to go into school now and say, I want to be a special education teacher, what would you say to them? Would you say, what kind of guidance would you give?
The first thing I would tell them is that they had to have an iron hand with a velvet glove.
Okay.
That be very compassionate and empathetic and understanding, and at the same time have 5 rules that everybody pays attention to. I did, after I had worked with little kids, I did teach at Simmons College. And it was graduate students who were out in the field teaching special ed. And their stories and mine were crazy, but they were helpful for every one of us, because you have to figure out what you're going to do with, especially if they're behaviorally needy kids.
Right. Wow.
How to get them to behave themselves. And it's pretty interesting that most kids like the idea of having you in charge, because they don't trust the other kids, especially if it's a real needy group of children. So if you can stop them all, they're all okay.
Yeah, and there are some of us who like to play by the rules, and there are some of us who don't like to play by the rules.
Right.
So I would think that would be really hard to make sure that everybody's on.
They weren't always on the same page, because that's the reason they were there.
Yes. So that must have been a little trying. And what brought you to Kennebunkport?
I had moved down to Cape Cod after my husband Leo passed away of leukemia in his 40s. And the kids were 4 kids in 5 years that all went off to college or to the military. And so Mama decided she was going to go and move to Cape Cod and start a new life, because I was 42. Lived down there for 10 years and met my husband Les. And we decided that it wasn't going to be the Cape. We were going to get married, but we were going to come up and find something else on the seashore. So it turned out to be Kennebunkport. And what a wonderful thing. That was 1999, so that's now 22 years.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of people that I know here, which is nice.
Well, and we are very glad that you found Kennebunkport, and you found us here at the library. So, and so had one of you been here before and said, "Hey, I know this really nice town in southern Maine," or did you vacation here and say this would be a great place to?
We did. My mom and dad, just before my father passed away, bought a house in York, Maine. So we were there often with our children. And then when we were thinking about where coming up, we looked through Portsmouth and Rye and all the way up. And my sister Gail had a house that she used part-time, she and Stephen, for in Kennebunk, just not that far from Mother's Beach. And so I came up to look around, and this was lovely. So we stayed here a couple of times and said, yeah, that's it.
Where did you
That's it.
stay? Do you remember?
Yes, the first place we stayed, because we had doggies. And that's the wonderful places that I have been able to stay over the
Yeah,
years because
yeah.
you had your dog. But it's the Dory. What is the name of it now? The Cove. The Cove.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Whatever.
Yep.
That's a place that we stayed a couple of times, which gave us a chance because they're individual units
Right.
to step out with a little pup.
Yeah. So, and so we touched on a little bit about volunteering, but can you talk a little bit about, you've kept yourself very, very busy since you moved to Kennebunkport. What kinds of things did you do as far as volunteering?
Well, when we first moved here, Les had retired, and he was 10 years older than I was. I wasn't ready to retire. So I tried working for another year and a half down at Simmons, and it didn't. It was just silly,
Yeah.
driving back and forth. And so I left the job, and I decided that I'd see if I could do some volunteer work. And this was probably the first place that I volunteered. Volunteered, got on the board here, and was president of the library for a little while. And then branched out into food rescue, into River Tree Arts, into helping out at the Franciscan Monastery, and then the Child Abuse Prevention Council, which is what I was involved with for quite a while. And then the hospital,
Yeah.
and then the prison, working with young women. I'm still doing that to a certain degree, mentoring females who are incarcerated.
So what kind of program is that? Like, how did you get involved with the prison mentoring program?
There's a group that comes out of Cape Elizabeth that's called My Sister's Keeper. And it's been going for 25, 30 years. And it started as part of their church, which is a Protestant church, and expanded from the jail to working with any element of the prison. So the place that I worked was in, Sanford, next town over, Alfred. And where the jail is, there was a facility that they opened up for women who were in prison and needed lockup, but they wanted to get them ready to get out into the world. So there were 68 women.
Oh my gosh.
From 21 to the oldest gal in there for a while was in her mid-60s. And our job was just go up and mentor and to read with them or to bring them food or to just hear about their stories.
Wow.
And a lot of it was that, do you really think that was a good idea? You know, because they would get themselves in trouble. When they would get themselves in trouble, they would go back to lockup in Wyndham. So,
Yeah.
and usually when I would see them again, they would say, "Yeah, I know. I stepped over that line, didn't I?" And yeah, you did.
Yeah. And so would these people, would they see family too, or just you, or?
No, but they would. Some of them were able to get jobs at our local McDonald's and Burger King and a few different things. It was always fun to go in to order a cup of coffee or a burger and just go because
Yeah.
you knew them, you know. And they liked that. But they could see their parents. They could see their kids. Most of them had, or a lot of them had children. And if they were lucky, the children, they were going to get their children back when they got out. But they had usually had a grandmother or a husband or boyfriend
Yeah.
that would bring the children in.
Wow. And so for the Child Abuse Council, what kinds of things would you do for them? Was it more of a board position or?
It was, yeah. They had people that worked on staff, but I was on the board and then president for a couple of years. And that's where I got to meet an awful lot more people from the port and elsewhere in the area. People that had generous hearts, generous financial support for us.
Yeah.
I think I've been in most of the houses on Summer Street that are gorgeous, and most of the or a lot of the houses on Ocean Ave,
Wow.
where we were able to have right across the street to be able to have an event. So all of those were nice for garden tours and that kind of stuff.
Great. Now I know that you like to write. So actually you shared with me something that you had put together, and can you talk a little bit about that? I've gone through it and I need to get it back to you, by the way.
Oh, that's all right.
But what a lovely compilation. But where did that come from? So
the stories in there.
Yeah.
Well, I was lucky enough also to become involved with the York County Co-Star, and when I started, which was, it must have been sometime around the 2003 or 4, I think. What we all had different towns that we talked about what was going on the next week. So that the idea being that people would buy the paper to find out what was coming up.
Right.
But they let us expand a little bit so we could talk about the events, but also I ended up, because I like to write, probably wrote a little too much, but it was fun to do that, because if one of the events was going to be the Child Abuse Prevention Council was running something, and I was going to talk about that, I would throw in a paragraph about child abuse in York County, or whatever the event was coming up at the library, who was going to be here, and then talk about the library.
So I always loved your quotes. You always had lovely quotes that you would add. Where would you find those things? Would you find them in a book? Would you find them on the internet?
A little bit of everything.
Just have them in your back pocket?
In fact, no, actually just about. I went downstairs while I was waiting, and I have 2 out of 3 of the books are a quote on a page, on a page, and that's what I really like to think about, is something short and sweet. And I've used a lot of those with the prison ladies, because they need that positive stuff.
Yeah.
They've had a hard time with COVID because they've been in lockdown, which means that they're all without family, without anybody meeting. Nobody can get a job, and they're coming from different places in the world and in their lives, and it's hard for them.
Yeah, and I can imagine. I bet people think, the world has given up on me.
Absolutely.
So
we have Zoomed with them a few times, which is hilarious, but but it's better than nothing.
It is better than nothing. Yeah. I was going to ask a little bit about the hospital. So you were on I know you did some really great things at Southern Maine. Southern Maine Healthcare was Southern Maine Medical, but the Women's Auxiliary.
The Women's Auxiliary.
So you did some wonderful things for them.
We had monthly meetings and planned different things, and had flower sales, and had a really nice thing at the Nonantum every year for the Child Abuse Council. It was a silent auction, which was a good fundraiser, and for the hospital we usually would have a couple of guests. Mrs. Bush came a few times, and with little Millie, and her puppy, and it was more of a dinner presentation type of thing,
Yeah.
or an author sometimes. But for the and then the organization would buy whatever they needed, prenatal care for the little preemie babies, or new types of beds or chairs or whatever that they were asking for.
And you had the ability to get like birthing rooms, so they were. I mean, that was a pretty major thing. For
That was a
Southern
big
Maine.
thing. That was a big thing.
Yeah. So
Now the interesting thing is that organization is no longer,
I know.
and it isn't any longer because an awful lot of the women who volunteered. It's been going for 30, 40 years, but a lot of the women who volunteered weren't working.
Right.
So,
Right.
and that's because it was taking took up a lot of time. It was sort of a part-time job without pay, and the women just had to work.
Yeah. Right. We need you to teach a course though on how to give back, or to take some time out of your life to do volunteer work, because I know life is busy and people do have jobs and other obligations, but boy, it is wonderful to have somebody like you who can step in. And this has been my sidekick for 13 years of Pasco lectures. How many of you missed? Probably like one.
One maybe. But they have been fun.
Yeah,
I missed that a lot.
And all of the fundraising that you helped us with, as well, over the years. But
I've done some.
It's really important to do that, and I hope that as things get back to whatever normal it is, that people will think about maybe somebody lent them a hand during the pandemic, and so maybe it's time to feel that my turn.
And even if they can't volunteer for a board or to get involved totally, which is what happens, but to volunteer for the day of the garden tour, the day of whatever, because that helps out a lot.
It does help
when you need extra people.
Yeah, it does, and that's something that I think people are nervous about, because they feel like once they sign up, they're,
oh yeah,
they got you.
Well, somebody gave me napkins one time, little cocktail napkins that said, "This reminded me of you," and it's somebody sitting at a table going, "Me, pick me," which is exactly what I seem to do. But anyway.
Now, as far as writing goes, have you ever written anything longer than, have you written a book, or?
Well, Les and I, when we were first married, he was writing professional stuff for UMass, and he thought he'd like to write a book, and so the story that he wanted to write about was Leo's life. Just before Leo died of leukemia, he had been involved in a case. He worked for the FBI. And he had been involved in a case of a missing child in Wayland, Mass., Sarah Pryor. And so he had told, in fact, the Pryors, even though he knew he had leukemia, he said, I'm going to find her for you. I'll find Sarah. And a year later, when he died at Sloan Kettering, I brought him back here for a wake, and in walked the Pryors that I had never met before. And they said, when we heard that Leo had died, we knew that he had found our Sarah, which was a beautiful thought.
Oh my gosh.
Beautiful thought. And they did find parts of Sarah's body a couple of years later, and I went to her service. But so we put that book together, and it was a great way for Les and me to spend time talking about the things that were important to you and Leo's life. So,
wow. Is that in a drawer somewhere, or is it?
Well, actually, we tried to get it published.
Yeah.
And every time, this was, I don't know, probably 15 years ago. And the only we would hear, oh my gosh, this is a great story, except it would be better if Leo had lived, or if he had found Sarah before she died. And it was like, yeah, this isn't a fiction. This is his life and their life together. And I had interviewed and met Barbara again, the mom, and she was expecting a book and whatever, and it certainly wasn't going to change the story.
Wow.
So I made copies and gave them to the 4 kids, and a couple of extra ones for grandkids.
I would like to read that sometime.
Well, you can.
Well, that's
I
too.
will lend it to you.
Thank you. That's too bad because we don't all live in Hollywood, and
No.
you know, and that's what I think. I think memoir. You know, when we memoir today is a lot more embraced than it ever used to be, even for publishers taking a chance on somebody's story, because like this, everyone has one. But, you know, we are learning so much about people that we never would have.
Right.
And some of the issues that come up. And I think that's one genre that I am so drawn to now that I never used to be. I like reading biographies, but I like memoir so much more because it's really that person telling you
That's right.
their story. So.
That's right.
And how could you ever change the outcome?
That's
of that?
right. That's right. And those are some lovely stories. And one of the ones, and I think that we've been able to, fortunately, to have the author here. When We Were the Kennedys. That is Monica Wood.
Yeah.
But that particular story was her way of telling her life.
Right.
In relationship to Jackie Kennedy and her losing John. So it was kind of her father died at the same time. So her mother kept saying, if Jackie can do this, I can. Right. So the story is told that way, which is lovely.
Which was a really interesting way to tell that.
It was a very interesting way to
And I
tell
do
it.
remember one of our patrons coming in one day and she slapped the book on the table and she said, this was a horrible story. There was nothing about the Kennedys in it.
Yeah, she was looking for Jackie and Jack's
exactly.
story.
But a really interesting way of talking about her entire life, even though it was set in one year.
Right.
So
That's right.
As the last part of our conversation, we have a rapid fire questions. So these are just one word answers for you.
All right.
And some of them trip people up because there's many answers. So
Okay, I'll try.
Favorite color?
Blue.
Favorite book?
Since I just mentioned it, I liked that because that's it.
Okay. When We Were the Kennedys?
That was not one word, but
That's okay. Favorite vacation spot? Forever. Like wherever you've been.
forever. Australia.
Oh. Any part of Australia?
From Sydney on up.
Okay.
We spent a couple of weeks there.
Favorite restaurant?
Oh, the local. It's definitely a local one, and it's but they're all the same. They're all wonderful. Not because we all have local people watching this.
That's okay. Favorite cocktail?
Canadian Club on the Rocks.
Okay. Favorite thing to do locally?
Lots of stuff. I belong to Quest, which is a fun thing to do. That's a daily event. But walking, any of the things that we do for parties outside, book clubs in the outside, some good stuff.
Yeah. And the last one is the one that always gets everyone. Your favorite library?
Oh. Let's see. Might be the one in Maynard, Massachusetts. No, of course it's this one.
It could be the one in Maine.
Well,
okay.
that's when the libraries were on the second story.
Yeah.
And you'd go up the big long sets of stairs into this dark kind of place.
Yeah.
And I'm sure in a lot of small towns it's like that.
Yeah, I'm sure. And
But this is lovely.
yes. Well, This lady has one of the biggest hearts I have ever known. We love you. We thank you for being our friend. And we thank you for coming on our show.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
And thanks for joining us for another episode of What's Your Story?
What's Your Story? Thank you, Mary Lou.